Well, we can't have another year without another documentary about somebody in the Beatles, can we? What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's documentary review of the prime original movie, Man on the Run. This will follow Paul McCartney when he was with Wings and is directed by Morgan Neville. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we now have another documentary about somebody in the Beatles. This time, of course, Paul McCartney in his after of course, of him being the frontman of the Beatles and his kind of journey to meeting, of course, Linda McCartney, and as well as joining forces with a new group that he started called Wings, which became really popular. So, in essence, this is basically Morgan Neville, who did, the story of Fred Rogers, the one that came out in 2018 that I really loved, and is a journey and kind of we see footage that we may have never seen before of Paul McCartney and his element, as well as kind of home footage and kind of close personal things of Paul McCartney with his children, with of course his wife, and the eventual aligning of Wings, as well as the death of John Lennon, which we know a lot about. In the fashion of similar to I Want to Be Your Neighbor, this is just kind of a journey and exploration with people who do voiceover work of that ilk, like Mick Jagger and, of course, John Lennon's kids and Paul McCartney's kids, and basically allows Paul McCartney to kind of show off how he was feeling about the after effects of the kind of breakdown of the Beatles themselves, the kind of the disillusion of that group with John Lennon and Yoko Ono and George and Ringo and stuff like that. So that's kind of what this documentary is. To be fairly honest, it's more of a exploration of the aftermath of not only the Beatles but the inclusion of Linda McCartney and the eventual Wings group that he created. Okay, so I am very hard on these documentaries just for the simple fact that I think sometimes they're puff pieces. They're sometimes they don't go deep enough. They don't go hard enough. Stuff like the Beatles, a lot of the Beatles documentaries, I feel that way because we know so much about the Beatles. So there's not really anything new. And I think the closest I've ever found interesting was just recently the Mel Brooks documentary. And even I had issues with that, but I forgive it what it is because it was a 2-part documentary. But a lot of times I think they're afraid to kind of push the boundaries of these creators and these individuals. So I think, it just becomes very difficult. So doing an exploration of, Paul McCartney is extremely difficult because he's so documented and so kind of out there in the open, the idea of that he was replaced and was actually killed in a car crash, the idea of him creating Wings. It's a documentary that has a lot of difficulty because if you know a lot about Paul McCartney and Wings, this is going to be nothing new for you. And I don't know. I find documentaries that deal with harder subjects more interesting because they're willing to take chances that a lot of these documentaries about celebrities and, of course, musicians don't do. And so for my honest review, I really enjoyed this documentary. I think it's a crowd pleaser. I think it's very entertaining, but it's a lot of stuff you may know. Okay, let me back up. There are some things in this that I didn't know about with Wings and how difficult and how the kind of like revolving door of creators that was part of it, and how a lot of people feel that Paul McCartney was a little forceful of what he was, but he is Paul McCartney. There is some stuff in here about just kind of the nature and machinations of like how difficult it was for Linda McCartney and how difficult it was for Paul McCartney to create something after the Beatles, which it truly was. A lot of people thought John Lennon did much better stuff and George and Ringo did much better stuff at the beginning, but I think after stuff like Ram and Born on the Run, I think Wings proved themselves. They also did, of course, Live and Let Die, the famous theme song for the Bond film. And I think there are some good things in here, but for an hour and 55 minutes, once again, I think it is short-shrifted by the simple fact that it's just more of an exploration piece about Paul McCartney, and it doesn't really go deep. And I think it tries to go a little deeper than most things. But I think for the most part, I just think it's another documentary that just kind of celebrates Paul McCartney, celebrates Wings, and allows people to talk about Paul McCartney as a celebrity individual who really worked hard for his family and worked hard for the creative nature of who he was. But it's not a bad documentary. It's not the Beach Boys documentary, which I felt was really a puff piece. It didn't really add anything. And once again, the problem with this documentary too is going to be the simple fact that if you know a lot about Paul McCartney and Wings, you're not going to get anything new out of this. If you know like his history with how difficult it was for him to get Wings off the ground, how difficult it was was to deal with the aftermath of the Beatles, how difficult it was for Paul McCartney to deal with John Lennon and his death, and just the overarching nature. I don't think it adds anything new. I think that's not Morgan Neville's fault, because he did get some really interesting footage, which probably has never been seen before. And I think Paul McCartney in his twilight years in his 80s is willing to be more open, like a lot of these creators. I think it's just not going to add much to who you think of Paul McCartney as an individual. It's not, once again, Morgan Neville is a very confident director. I think the Lego documentary, Piece by Piece, that of course had Pharrell Williams, was actually very creative. And I think Won't You Be My Neighbor came out in a time when it was really needed, and I think it's still needed. But I think the Fred Rogers documentary is more wonderful because it really gets to the heart of who Fred Rogers was. It really gives us some deep meaning to his persona as an individual, how much he really cared. And I think it's really difficult sometimes to really care about somebody like Paul McCartney, because he really hasn't struggled that much in the essence of like a Fred Rogers and what he was trying to represent. And I think you had to look at this movie and this documentary as more of a celebration of Paul McCartney and his time with Wings and his wife than anything else, to be fairly honest. And Denny Lane or whatever his name was, it doesn't delve deep at all into Linda McCartney's passing at all, which maybe is for the better. But I think in the end, it's a really fun documentary. I think it's a crowd pleaser more than anything. And I think, once again, there are much better documentaries out there that deal with harder subjects that I want to see. But I think for something that is a creative endeavor, I think Morgan Neville is clearly capable of putting together a good narrative. So overall, that is my take on Man on the Run. It will be on Prime Video. And also, I think there's a musical CD, a compilation that is included with it when it comes out. But if you like the Beatles, if you like Paul McCartney and Wings, I think it's highly recommended. So there you go. Anyways, with that said, that is my take on Man on the Run, which will be on Prime Video, so check it out. In the comments below, what is your favorite Wings song? Not Beatles, Wings song. What is your favorite moment of Paul McCartney's post-Beatles career? Tell me in the comments why. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out, guys.